You're listening to Sarah Hagan Backstage, with interviews and insights from years inside the music industry. Join Sarah as she talks with masters of their crafts, finding out what makes them tick both inside and outside of the music business. This week, Sarah talks with Taku Hirano.
Welcome to Sarah Hagan Backstage. My guest today, Taku Hirano, is a world-renowned percussionist, known for his incredibly diverse background and for playing in the studio and on stage with some amazing artists such as Fleetwood Mac, Whitney Houston, Stevie Wonder, Dr. Dre, and many more. Today we will talk to Taku about his percussion education, his experience playing these many genres of music, and his new album, which is coming out in October. So come along with me as I catch up with Taku Hirano. Taku, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much. It's so great to see you, Sarah.
So great to see you too. I feel like, it's been quite a long time, but I have been keeping up with you on social media. So I feel like, we're connected in that way.
Yeah.
I feel like that's the way people connect nowadays.
Totally. That's how we keep up with each other for sure.
Right.
It's so weird because then you'll run into people like a year later, they're totally caught up on everything you've been doing, but you haven't seen them like in ages. So
I know it's nice. Like it's a familiar feeling at least, but it is a little strange when someone says, oh yeah, I saw that this and that and this happened. And you're thinking, oh yeah, I did put that out there. So
no, totally.
Absolutely. So how have you been? Tell me how you've been through, the past year and a half with quarantine and all of that. Give us an update on you.
Big changes. I relocated from New York to Los Angeles mid shutdown. Actually, I was in New York for 10 plus years, having moved from LA to New York, and then everything shut down on March 17th, and by early July last year, my wife and I moved to LA, and it's been a good move in terms of just space, weather, sanity, it's as opposed to living in Manhattan where it's really tight quarters and
right.
So we got out to LA before last fall and last winter. So there wasn't any of the shutdown in the middle of winter factor for us. So, So that was good for, mental health.
Mm-hmm, I bet.
And work-wise, I've been steadily getting a little bit more and more busy. The funny thing is like I tell people, I told people, hey, I moved to LA, and then all of a sudden I got this influx of recording work. Well, all the recording work is remote. So I'm kind of like, I could have been doing this out of New York at the same time, they're like, hey, you moved to LA, great. Can you play on this project for me? I'm just like, yeah, I could have played on it anyway, but I'll take the energy shift that's coming from the universe to me. And yeah, so I've worked on a lot of great projects, and some film and TV stuff, some TV cues. I worked on Leanne Rimes. Actually did 2 albums actually. So I did a ton of percussion for that. So
wow. Oh, that's so great. I'm so glad that you've been keeping busy. And I understand the shift from New York to LA, avoiding the winter for so many reasons. Living in the Northeast, I know all about that. So and you do too, because you were at Berkeley, of course, for your college time. And speaking of moving and being in different places, I think your background is so incredibly interesting. Born in Osaka, Japan, right? Mm-hmm. And then and correct me if you're wrong, but you came to California and then moved to Hong Kong, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
I came to California when I was like 3 months old. So I've never lived in Japan. So kind of culturally, in a lot of ways, I'm very American. Mm-hmm. Japanese was my first language. I didn't learn to speak English until preschool, kindergarten.
Wow.
But and then I did K through 6th, and then my father's in the textiles trade, and we ended up moving to Hong Kong on a business transfer. So I did middle school and half of high school in Hong Kong, and then family got transferred back to California, and then finished up high school and went to Berkeley. throughout that almost the entire time, I was playing music. I started music at the age of 7. So I was definitely, by the time I moved to Hong Kong from middle school, I was already way into percussion. So
that's incredible. And I mean, it just, being a percussionist and having kind of the background that you've had, I'd imagine that really affected your technique and your style and the kind of vast like genres of music that you play.
Definitely. I started out classical. Like my first instrument was marimba. My first instrument at 7 years old was piano. But at age 9, I started percussion. Yeah, my first instrument was a keyboard instrument. It was marimba. And then straight onto, or not straight onto leaving behind, but adding onto marimba, concert snare, timpani, and drum kit. So, yeah. And so just, I kind of had the formal education, but I was always into like wanting to learn new styles of music and listening to all different sorts of things, even as a kid. So I obviously listened to a lot of classical, a lot of jazz growing up, and then whatever was, being a kid of the 80s, whatever was on the radio and whatever was on TV. And then when I got into hand percussion around, I moved back from Hong Kong to California, and I went to a school of the arts, and they had a really strong jazz program and Latin jazz program. So that's when I got into like Brazilian and Afro-Cuban music. So that's when everything kind of opened up, and then my whole concept of jazz opened up into like world music.
It's amazing. And I love that you were like the first hand percussion principal to graduate from Berklee. Like that's just, it's so significant. And were there programs developed after to foster more graduates?
Oh, definitely. Okay. They already had some hand percussion classes, but they were all electives. When I got accepted to Berklee, I basically had to choose between concert percussion, jazz vibraphone, or drum set.
Right.
And so I was like totally burnt out on classical percussion. I had been training from probably about 8th grade, I was like, I'm going to Juilliard. So I was like already like, I was studying with the principal timpanist of the Hong Kong Philharmonic, and just doing like Tony Cerrone etudes, from like 9th grade, and trying to figure all that stuff out. So it's just like, by the time I got really into like Latin jazz in 11th and 12th grade, and I got to Berklee, like that's what I wanted to do. But they didn't have that as a principal instrument, so I entered as a drum set major, and I just took a bunch of electives, and then it turned out my second semester at Berklee was when Giovanni Hidalgo started teaching there. And so I was like, oh my gosh, like, I don't even know. I bet you he's only going to be there for like a year or less, just because, he's so in demand. He's a master player. So I diverted like everything to studying with him. So like I was taking like every elective, every group class he taught, and took private lessons with him, all as electives, because I was a drum set major. And then he ended up staying at Berklee for 4 years, and it was the 4 years that I was there. So that was something I actually studied privately with Giovanni Hidalgo for 4 years. And my second year of college, Jamie Haddad started teaching there. So that I got really into a lot of the North African, Middle Eastern frame drumming and concepts of like South Indian percussion that he had studied over there. So I got into basically world percussion with him. And then by my junior year, that's when they announced they're going to start a hand percussion principal. I had accrued all these like elective credits, and by then I knew my major was going to be what they call professional music, which is kind of a build your own major. And my major was essentially a performance / music business major. So that's those, with an advisor, I made those into my requirements to graduate. And then coupled with changing my principal instrument to hand percussion, where there's probably only 3 of us when they rolled that out. My year, I had 2 years left of college, and I was like, unless I want to stay longer, like I'm going to have to cram everything in those latter 2 years of college. So yeah, my last 2 years of college, I essentially did 3 years and 2 years, if that makes sense. I did 2 summers in a row, which were full-fledged semesters in terms of work.
Right. That's incredible.
So that's what allowed me to graduate and walk on time, was because I essentially crammed in a whole extra year of college to finish the major. So that's really kind of why I'm the first hand percussion major, because I did the whole major in 3 years.
Wow.
As a degree student, I think there are a couple other people who walked that were percussionists, but they were in a diploma program, so they didn't get a bachelor's degree. So their requirements were not as strenuous as a degree major. So yeah. Absolutely.
I get that. And it's amazing. I mean, Giovanni Hidalgo, I remember when he was at Berkeley, and it's just, I mean, to have the chance to study with him. And I saw him perform. The last time I saw him perform was at PASIC. And it was just so incredible. He's still the master. And always teaching, it doesn't matter. We would be at dinner and he would be teaching. We would be waiting to go on stage and he's teaching. It's like, it's just a constant thing. And I just think that's incredible.
Yeah. Definitely has such a joy for just music and also just sharing it with people, his love of music. So it was great. Yeah. Great having him as a teacher,
Absolutely. And you studied with Alan Dawson as well, which is
I did. Yeah. I got to Berkeley my freshman year, and some of my mentors, including Adugu Chancellor, he was a mentor of mine back in California. Mm-hmm. And so I said, I'm going to Berkeley. What do I need to do? Who do I need to seek out? And they're like, absolutely, Alan Dawson. He no longer teaches at Berkeley, so you need to seek him out. And I don't even know how I did it. Like I'm trying to remember, like I asked around. This is like pre-Google searches and even cell phones. So it was like, I think I asked around right soon after I got to Berkeley, and someone gave me his phone number. I cold called him from a payphone in the hallway outside my dorm room, and he started giving me directions. I had to grab some pad of paper, do it, and then I had to, he lived where did he live? He lived in Lexington. So then I had to figure out how to get there,
Wow.
And back time, it was insane. I was thinking about it now. I was like, okay, for those watching who know Boston or go to Berkeley, it's like, just that you're like, okay, I'm a freshman. At that time I was probably still 17. And I was like, I was like, okay, I've never really taken the the subway system. So it's like, okay, take the green line to the red line, go to the end, and then walk 20 minutes through the suburbs in the woods to a house. It was insane. I don't even know how I did it.
I can imagine that. And I think that's so incredible that as a 17-year-old, you had the spirit to pick up a payphone and make a cold call like that, and then just do what it took to get there. Yeah. And public transportation back then too wasn't as easy as it is, or not that it's easy in Boston.
Coming from the burbs and in California, it's like I never bought a bus token before, so it was like, okay, I have to figure out how to do this and get there on time,
Yes.
So back time, how long? Yeah. So it was interesting. It was so I studied with him definitely my freshman year, for a full year I studied with him. So I still, somewhere in boxes, I have all my notes, handwritten notes by him for every lesson and whatnot. So
I love that. That's incredible. And one other thing too, that I just want to mention, excuse me, is your time in Cuba, because Cuba is just, it's musically so fascinating. I love Cuban music, the style of Cuban music, the percussion involved in it. It's just it's so percussion heavy. And it's just so moving. There's something about it that's so moving and unique, to that place. I can't even imagine. And you were there for a while, weren't you?
I was there for a month.
Okay.
Yeah. I had already moved to LA after college. I had already gotten my first couple of gigs. I'd already done a couple tours. And I had a break, and I've been wanting to go to Cuba for a while, and there was a program, like a drumming and dancing program that they had organized. I don't know, I forgot the name of the company, but and they had permits through the U.S. Treasury Department, and you basically would pay the organizer, and they would figure it all out and get you to Cuba. And so I took part in that program, and it's interesting. I haven't been back since, and now at this point it's been decades. So but it was interesting. Like, it was definitely a stamp in time. I don't know if you've seen the movie Buena Vista Social Club.
I have not yet.
Oh, okay. Great documentary. And it turns out I was there like maybe a month after they filmed all that footage. So like watching that documentary was like that. It was exactly when I was there, and that's what it exactly looked like and whatnot. So it was interesting, same thing. Like some of the things, like looking back, like, I don't know. I can't say I don't know what I was thinking, but I was like, how the heck did I do that? Like I was part of a music program, but then I wanted to seek out Changuito as a teacher. He didn't teach the program, so I had to ask around and figure out how to get in touch with them. I don't even remember how that happened, but I think there's no phones. I think somebody from the front desk of the hostel that we were staying at got in touch with them for me, and then they relayed to somebody else, come to my house on this such and such a day. I became friends with this guy that was hanging out at the program who was a local who spoke English, and he was like, "Oh, I'll translate for you." I was like, I don't have any really much to pay you. And he's like, no, I'm just going to come hang out. He just hung out with me for the whole month, translating lessons and hooking up, places to eat for us, like, because then there weren't really any restaurants open. So you go to like people's private homes to these paladars, and he would hook up dinner for us. And it would just, I don't even know how he did it. And then like getting in a, it's not even a taxi really. It's like private cars were rolling down the street, and you would just flag them down and tell them where you're going. You're essentially hitchhiking. Yeah. And so just like, I ended up like going out to his house multiple times and studying with him. And because I had 4 years with Giovanni, he took a liking to me immediately, and I had a lot of techniques down in my hands already. And so, so it was nice. It was great that like, I heard all these like, I don't want to say horror stories, but he's been known to be really hard on students. So I went with a little like trepidation, and he was just genuinely psyched that this Japanese guy took that much interest, in his techniques and just
absolutely
music in general. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think, you probably approached it the way that you approach everything else, which is authentically, you were there purely to learn. And I'm sure that was appreciated, just like those calls that you made. And that's just, it's amazing. I mean, I give you so much credit for doing that and seeking out that teaching. Absolutely. And as a teacher, I can imagine that they loved that too, because you did what was necessary to find them and connect with them and to get there. And to get to Cuba in itself is an amazing thing. So
yeah. I mean, but that's what it's about, really, right? I mean, in kind of the age-old way of almost apprenticeship, it's like you have to earn your keep with a teacher, and so
yes,
I think a lot of that is lost now with the immediacy of YouTube and even access, that people expect to have access to me or to other people who are, and I'm not like putting myself on a pedestal, but at the same time, it's like, it was just a different decorum when I came up.
Absolutely. Yes. I'm sure you had a level of respect and reverence, right. For their expertise and their experience. And I think you're right with the immediacy of things. It makes everything seem so accessible. Like you don't have to work for it. You don't have to put in the time. Whereas, this field of work, it is all about putting in the work, gaining the experience and the years of learning technique. And especially with what you do with percussion, I feel like it's so much about technique, of
Yeah.
course. Playing drum set and playing other instruments, of course, technique is involved. But when it comes to hand percussion, especially in the percussion instruments, it's like you have to have that technique to get the right sounds and, you know, and just to make it authentic.
Yeah.
And you've definitely done that.
Thank you.
And the other thing I think is really interesting. So I think when I met you, you were maybe, I'm trying to remember what you were doing at the time, but maybe the AR Ramen tour, I think.
Okay. That would have been 2010, 2011.
Yeah, so probably, and maybe, were you doing Fleetwood Mac before that, or was that after? Was it?
I didn't. Oh no, Fleetwood Mac. My first time out with them was 2003.
2003. Okay, so maybe you were with Fleetwood Mac when I met you, and then Slumdog Millionaire came out, and that tour happened. Okay, so that was the succession. But I just remember thinking you were out, you know, with these really incredible acts. And the diversity between the genres that you were playing was always fascinating to me, because you would go from one thing to the next, and I would think, oh, and now he's doing this, and you know, now he's out with, you know, you were doing the Michael Jackson Cirque du Soleil tour, and it was always something like different and new. And it kind of struck me because your background is so diverse in your styles of playing, and you know, you're well versed in, like, you know, West African and North Indian and Afro-Cuban styles, and then you put it to use in these different genres of music, and it's just so incredible to me. So I just have to point that out. To go from one thing to the next.
It was funny. I know, like, I did. The first time I went on tour with Fleetwood Mac, I came from Lionel Richie, working with him on and off for 3 or 4 years, jumped to Fleetwood Mac. So that was like very decidedly like pop, R&B, but pop, kind of adult contemporary pop, to Fleetwood Mac, adult contemporary rock.
Yeah.
And then from there, I jumped straight to Bette Midler, which was like highly orchestrated show tunes. I'm playing like vibes, xylophone, timpani, and pop percussion, you know, like electronic pads and congas and whatnot, and small percussion. But it was like going from playing like Fleetwood Mac rock tunes to like, you know, spoofs on famous show tunes. So Bette Midler's running around like in a wheelchair with a mermaid tail on. It was like a huge change from one year to the next. And I literally, like, we weren't even finished with the Fleetwood Mac tour. We still had makeup dates, and I was already in world tour rehearsals with Bette. And it was the same tour manager between the two. So he and I were like flying back and forth. Like, so working out that I would get a couple days off from rehearsals to fly out and do a one-off of Fleetwood and shoot right back to rehearsal. So it was like, in those things, it was like, wow, like it was a little discombobulating for sure, musically. Yeah.
I bet. Yeah. Because you're like, the mindset is switching back and forth too. Totally. When you're doing two of those things at once. And then on top of it, like the work that you did with Dr. Dre, and, you know, it's just so different. And then, like you just mentioned, you incorporate the electronic pads into what you do too. So, you know, you have this like very traditional hand percussion, and then you are like using the electronic pad, which I love.
Yeah. And the Dr. Dre thing was interesting because I ended up using like a lot of classical percussion techniques when I was recording with him. So, like, I mean, case in point, there's one tune on that 2001 album called The Watcher, and he fell in love with, I was just kind of figuring out what to play. I was like, oh, I'll play tambourine on this song. And I did a thumb roll, you know, which is pretty standard, like with concert percussion, but he had never heard it before. He's like, do that again, you know? And so the whole groove that I played was just like a thumb roll into beat 4. I played other percussion parts, but that was like almost consistent throughout the whole song. And side note is the way Dr. Dre worked, at least at that time, was that even if I was playing like a 1-bar pattern or a 2-bar pattern over and over again, like, you know, normally they say, oh, play for 16 bars. We'll find the best 2 bars. We'll cut it, paste it, loop, and cut it, loop it, just paste it all the way to the song. He had me play the song from top to bottom.
Wow.
Every song I did. So, and it's really smart because first of all, you get a human feel because almost everything else rhythmically is programmed. But also, like, I'll naturally dig in a little harder on a chorus, or I'll back off if it's just, or whatever. So I'm kind of, even though I'm playing the exact same thing, like I'll play ever so slightly with a feel or dynamically. And he kept all of that, which was quite amazing. So, but all that to say, like, yeah, there are a couple, like I did some classical percussion techniques for Dr. Dre, and that sample ended up being used for a Jay-Z track. Jay-Z actually did like The Watcher Part 2 or whatever, Volume 2, as an addendum on one of Jay-Z's albums, and he had Dr. Dre produce that track, and Dre actually ended up taking the sample of me for that and using that for Jay-Z's track too. So, yeah, so it struck a chord with.
That is super cool. I love that. I'm going to have to go back and listen to that song and hear it, So often I'll hear something in a song and 99% of the time it's some kind of like drumming or percussion thing that just sticks with me. But I'll have to go back and check that out. That sounds.
It's literally just like a real loose, like almost like a 5-stroke roll into beat 4, like every beat 4 or every other beat 4 or something like that. But yeah, that's what he wanted throughout the whole song.
That is cool. And I love that he kept your, live track too, because that is so rare nowadays. And it does give a human feel to it too.
Yeah.
So
yeah. I don't know if he still does that. I have no idea. But back then when I recorded, that's what all of my percussion parts. Yeah. There's other songs I was playing in Kabasa. It was like 1, 2, 4, 1, 2, all the way through. He just like hit record, start the song, and then I'd just be like, okay, don't screw up, like I'll be really consistent all the way through. I look up, and sometimes he's like bobbing his head. Sometimes he'll like walk out the room. He'll just like disappear, and he'll come back before the track's over, and he's like, all right, great, let's move on, So
that's incredible.
It was an interesting experience. Yeah,
absolutely. I feel like you've had so many of those interesting experiences, and I so many times have been watching like an award show or some kind of presentation, and all of a sudden you're there, and I'm like, oh my gosh, look, it's Taku.
Yeah, that's the other thing. I get a lot of calls to do like kind of house band situations for, awards, Grammys, American Music Awards, that kind of stuff, and and then a couple different TV shows, like competitive shows. I was in the house band for Showtime at the Apollo, the reboot they did out of the Apollo Theater with Steve Harvey on Fox. And then I did another show called The Four. That was P. Diddy. It was hosted by Fergie, P. Diddy, DJ Khaled, and Meghan Trainor were the judges. And then I was in the house band for that. So
that's super cool.
Yeah.
That is really cool. Yeah. And with productions like that Michael Jackson, the Cirque du Soleil tour, and I'm imagining the same thing with the A.R. Rahman tour. I would imagine a lot of what you're doing is coordinating with the performers, because it's like so performance based, right? Those kinds of acts.
Definitely. With the Cirque thing, obviously Michael Jackson was no longer. That was a very interesting project. It was co-production between Cirque du Soleil and the Michael Jackson estate. And the musical designer, Kevin Antunes, the estate gave him access to all the multi-tracks for every Michael Jackson and Jackson 5 and Jackson's song there was, which is insane. And we got to actually like look at the sessions like on the computer, and even like solo parts. And essentially they hired all the core of the band were all former Michael Jackson band members, including Greg Fillinganes as the musical director, and they had Don Boyette on bass, who did the Bad and Dangerous tours. Jonathan Moffett was on drums, and he did I think he did 3 Jacksons tours, Destiny, Triumph, and Victory, and then he did History tour and This Is It. And John Clark was a rhythm guitarist. He did the Bad and Dangerous tour. So it was amazing, first of all, to be in a band with those guys. And then hear all the stories about the recording sessions and everything. It was just absolutely amazing. And then to play that music. And we essentially, like, since everything was multi-tracked, it was basically like, okay, I'll cover, you know, these specific parts on percussion, and then they'll be like, okay, great. And then they'll just fade them out. And so I'm playing them live, but everything else is there. So including Michael's voice. So as you're playing the music, like you're all of a sudden part of the album, you know, and it was really insane to play that. And then have like the visuals of Cirque du Soleil happening directly in front of you to what you're playing. It was so powerful. It was an amazing 2-year ride that I did. It lasted for 3. I jumped off after 2 years, but yeah.
It's amazing. I do remember seeing clips of that, and it just looked really incredible.
Yeah.
I remember, you know, people talk about their first like cassette tape. People of, you know, a certain age talk about the first cassette tape that they ever got. And my first cassette tape, I actually got 2 for a birthday, and it was Michael Jackson and Madonna. So like when I think about Michael Jackson, it's like, you know, part of the soundtrack of the, you know, my childhood.
And then Jonathan Moffat was doing both the Michael Jackson and Madonna gigs, which was you know,
right?
That's Moffat on Who's That Girl, Papa Don't Preach, Like a Prayer. That's him drumming on those albums, or those songs. And then you know, on the flip side, like he was with Michael for, you know, the tours and with the Jacksons. It was amazing to actually just getting to pick his brain, just hang out with him every night.
Yeah. He must have stories, just, you know, stories for days from that time period. And that's one other thing too that's really cool about being the percussionist, is also getting to accompany and play with and you know, just be with these other drummers too, who are, you know, who you look up to, like Jonathan Moffat, and who, you know, look to you as well. So, and I saw you recently played with Peter Erskine, right? You were
I sat in with the Monkestra, and he was playing, and that was a huge. I mean, I'm a huge Peter Erskine fan. I never met him, so I was like just geeked that I got to, you know, meet him. Yeah, I tell people, like, because I mean, I started playing drum set when I was 9. When I was 15. I started playing hand percussion when I was 15. I made that my bread and butter, but just to say that, like, having been a drummer first, now I get the best seat in the house, because I'm usually sitting right next to the drummer, or right, you know. So I've played with the best drummers, some of the best drummers in the world. You know, I seriously, like, my mentors in Dugu Chancellor, yes, but like I played next to J.R. Robinson, Steve Ferroni, Ricky Lawson. I'm trying to think who else. I mean, my dear friend Gordon Campbell. I mean, the list just goes. I guess I could just go from tour to tour. Oscar Seaton,
right?
with Big Fleetwood, obviously. But yeah. So anyway, it's just like I've gotten to play with so many amazing drummers: Kurt Biscara, Abel Laborio Jr. Anyway, the list just is endless. You know,
for sure.
Yeah. So it's amazing. I've had an amazing. It's been an amazing treat to have the best seat in the house as a drummer.
Absolutely. Yes. Yeah. So the level of talent on the stage when you're up there, and these other drummers are up there with you. And I always, like I said, every time I see you on TV, I'm like, oh, look who that is, you know, and you're always playing next to someone fantastic. And speaking of Oscar Seaton, Lionel Richie's drummer, he's just such an amazing person too. And I have to say, Lionel Richie is one of the nicest human beings on the planet. So it's not even just the drummers that you've played with, it's just some of the greatest musicians and the greatest people as well. And shout out to Mick Fleetwood too. I love Mick as well.
Yeah. No, I've definitely been like really blessed that I've worked with a lot of great artists. Like, everyone has been so cool. Like, I have peers who are like, oh my God, I couldn't stand working with this artist, or it's and that, the other, you know, horror stories of how they're treated. And like, in that respect, like I've had a really like kind of blessed, ride of it so far, that like every artist I've worked for has been really cool. Some of them are harder than others in one way or more particular or whatever, but you got to respect that, they're on the marquee and they're hard workers. And then, but there's definitely been some artists that have just been so cool, like that are really just fun in various ways. Lionel is always such a great guy. Mick Fleet was such a gentleman. Bette Midler is a hoot. She's hilarious. And, Bette's tours are always like filled with practical jokes and so it's just like touring with Whitney Houston was great. And I mean, like at the top of the tour, one of my favorite memories was like everybody for the most part in the band were like new members when I joined the band. And so rehearsals were so intense. And then we just went straight into shows, and it was like tons of press all around here and whatnot. And so once we got to kind of a smaller city in upstate New York for a show, it was like she actually had time. She didn't have like all these obligations and press hounding her and following her around and whatnot. So I remember like we had just gotten to the hotel. It was at Saratoga Springs. I'm not sure, but we had just gotten the hotel, and then the tour manager's like, "Boss wants to see you guys. You got to be down here in 15 minutes." We're like, "Oh, wow, what's going on?" And then we got down there, had this little minibus, and it was just the band and the dancers. And they're like, "You're going somewhere." So they took us out to like just this city park in the middle of town. And we're like, "Okay, what's going on?" And then Whitney pulls up in a limo, and she had like a whole picnic set up for us. Her people pull it out of the trunk of the limo, set it up, and then and brought like sent a runner out to a toy store, got a bunch of Frisbees and balls and soccer balls. It was just like, oh my God, this is like amazing, And that was the kind of person she was. So it was like, those are the types of things like that you kind of get a glimpse of just, how kind of regular they are and how good they are, So it was really fun. It was a great time.
That's incredible. I love that story. It is amazing to get to know the people that you're working with, and to know them as people and not just as musicians. And as you mentioned, sometimes musicians can have quirks, or they can have, their personality might be tough in one way or another. And you and I am sure know a lot of musicians who are very particular, because this is their craft, and this means so much to them, and they want it the way that they want it. And so that part of it is one thing, but then them as a human being is another thing. And it's great that you've had those really wonderful experiences too. And
definitely. I was going to say, that's the one thing I do enjoy about being on tour, as opposed to just being like a session guy. Especially as a percussionist, a lot of times when I'm doing recording sessions, like I definitely never see the artist. I usually just go in and I see a producer and a few other people. I go in and I overdub everything for the most part. But being on tour, like you get to like interact with the artist. You're on stage with them. You're off stage with them. You're traveling together sometimes. It's just like you really get to know them. You get to be kind of part of this. If not part of the family, then you get to be at least part of this bubble for that point in time, and travel together for months or years even, So it's definitely,
And we were talking before we came on to record, we were chatting a little bit about how small the industry really is, and how all these people are connected and everyone knows each other. And, so it is amazing when you can make those connections, and it feels like you have those connections for life, really, a lot of times. But I love that you've had those really great experiences. And I was going to say, I think that your personality really lends itself to that as well, because you're easygoing and you're very professional. And I think probably the people that you work with really appreciate that too. So,
I mean, I think, at the end of the day, it does take a certain personality, or let me say, certain personality traits don't work well for touring, no matter how good you are. So for the most part, most of the people I know who do the most work, they're pretty easygoing and cool and get along with others. And if you're going to be on a tour bus, for overnight drives and being close quarters and sharing dressing rooms and whatnot, you know, then you're basically punctual, you know, handle your business right, and are amenable to and able to pivot.
Mm-hmm.
And at the same time, you know, be very professional and be cool and easygoing. That's pretty much what it is. You know, it's not like a huge secret.
No, right?
Yeah.
But that's a great way to put it, though. That's really great advice. Absolutely. I like that a lot. And so, and one other thing I want to mention too, before we get to what you're up to right now, one of the artists that you had some time with is one of my favorite musicians, Trent Reznor. And I just wanted to hear a little bit about how you worked with him. You were, you were advising him, I think?
I was advising him. It was quick. Basically, a friend of mine was his tour manager for a decent stint, I think. And that tour manager and I met through the Bette Midler gig. And so he was a road manager on Bette Midler. And so we got to know each other. Fast forward a few years later, and then, he gave me a call and he said, "Hey, I'm going to be tour managing Trent Reznor. Nine Inch Nails is going out on this tour. It's a world tour. And there's a whole section in the middle of the show where Trent wants to play a certain number of tunes kind of acoustic." And I was like, okay, no problem. Like, I'm thinking acoustic, like, what are you going to, like, cajon, or, you know, like, what does he want?
Yeah.
He goes, no, he wants the entire band playing percussion. So all of his keyboard parts, he wants to play on like a 4-octave marimba. And he wants the auxiliary parts to be played on vibraphones and various mallet percussion instruments. And he wants, you know, essentially what it came down to is he needed like marching percussion, pit percussion instruments. They didn't know that. That's what they needed, but that's essentially what they had to have. Like, they're like, we need, it's in a interlude in the show. We have to be able to get them on and off stage. They can't be super delicate, you know, instruments and this and that together, and they could ship well. I'm just thinking, pit percussion. They got the big wheels, just roll them right out.
They have cases already, right? Yeah, that's perfect.
And they didn't really know any of that. So, you know, he said, can you, like, you know, start just brainstorming what instruments he could use to take the place of these instruments. I'll email you, blah, blah, blah. And so I did. I came up with the ideas, and he was like, you know what, let me just put you on the phone with Trent. And so we spoke several times, and I told him kind of what he needed. And he was just like, okay, I'm going to get management on it. We're going to order all the stuff. And he goes, but can you come, and once all the stuff is ordered, it's going to get sent to rehearsals. And then I need you to come and supervise everything, the construction of everything, and making sure that the backline crew, the techs know how to set up and break it down and case it all, and all that stuff. So that's what I did. I ordered all the equipment for them for that tour, and then later when it all arrived, then I was there on hand at rehearsals, kind of dealing with logistics for him. And so so he was really cool, real mellow guy.
Yeah,
so
that's
fantastic.
Fun.
It was a fun project, you know, just. Josh Freese was on drums then. And,
I was just going to ask who was playing drums then.
Elon Rubin was playing guitar. I think that was the first time he ever went out with them. Mm-hmm. This is like 2008. So it's right. They had just gotten Elon, and then and Josh was drumming then. So that's and then cool. Josh ended up playing like some crazy drum kit, like made of like trash cans with like heavy chains on and stuff on them to act as snares, and so it was cool. It was really cool.
That's awesome.
Yep.
Yeah.
So that was my stint with them. With
there you go. Right, and that's just it's another way that you can kind of like lend your unique expertise to another genre of music, another big act. That's fantastic.
Yeah.
So I want to spend a little time talking about what you have going on right now. Okay. And you just recently signed to Rope-A-Dope Records.
Yeah.
Right. And I just want to ask you, the Modern Icon imprint, can you talk a little bit about what that means?
Oh, essentially it's a sub-label under Rope-A-Dope Records.
Mm-hmm.
And so a friend of mine runs that imprint boutique label under Rope-A-Dope, and so I signed to him and Modern Icon and to Rope-A-Dope kind of simultaneously. So
that's perfect.
So Modern Icon is the boutique record label subsidiary of Rope-A-Dope that did all the nuts and bolts. So we produced it for under Modern Icon and did all that, and then delivered it to Rope-A-Dope, and then they handle all the larger scale stuff, getting it on every platform and whatnot. So
that's so great. Okay. Yeah. I needed to ask about that because I was like, it just sounds like perfect. I don't know what it is about it, but it sounds perfect. And so this release, you just released this single, and I am such a fan. And I know we were talking about just this single that you put together, but it's really kind of two songs joined. And it's so incredibly beautiful. And I just want you to talk about that.
Thank you. Well, okay. First of all, the album, which will be dropping on October 1st, it's a live album. I've been doing live shows in New York while on breaks from Fleetwood Mac in between tour legs. And so I'd recorded basically every show that I did, and I put together a great band. Majority of the guys in the band are guys that I used to go to Berkeley with. And so the aside on as far as the band, quick story is that three of us got together. All of us had careers that went in different directions and different genres, but we used to all play like hardcore jazz fusion and play each other's recitals and, around school and play sessions together and whatnot. And we all got together in New York for coffee, and it was like, wouldn't it be so great if we got to, we played that music again? Like I've gone off and now I'm playing rock and roll gigs, and the other guy, Adrian Harpum, he's a drummer. Mm-hmm. He ended up working a lot in kind of like the funk world. He was working with a lot of New Orleans musicians. And then Bruce Flowers, he's a pianist and keyboardist, great jazz pianist. And he ended up being in like Marcus Miller's band and David Sanborn's band. He'd taken like a decade plus hiatus from music, and he was looking to kind of get back in. And so we're like, let's book some gigs, And so I just kind of took the bull by the horn and I said, okay, I'm going to book some gigs, and this is what I want to do. They decided like they're fine with it being my project. So I filled out the band per their suggestions with some other New York cats on guitar and bass. And then I put together a set list of stuff kind of in that genre of 70s fusion, Herbie Hancock, Miles Davis, George Duke, Billy Cobham, as well as like kind of New Orleans inflected stuff, playing like meter stuff, Dr. John. And so I just started booking gigs. So, and the vibe was so great. It went really well. I'm so happy that like I actually got multi-track recordings of every show we did. Mm-hmm. And then so once the pandemic hit, I was kind of like, I had already been toying with the idea of doing an album. I was like, well, I'm sitting on all this great live recorded stuff. I was like, why go into this? Well, first of all, physically going into the studio was like, I wasn't going to be able to do it. I was already in talks with Rope-A-Dope about doing something. Mm-hmm. So Adrian, the drummer, is like, well, I have a relationship with Rope-A-Dope too. I have a boutique label through them. We can take all the multi-tracks, we can pick and choose, mix it down, and really, so I was like, bet, let's do it. So made a live album. So that's essentially what the project is. It's a live album. It's going to be basically Taku Hirano live in New York, releasing in October 1st. And we recorded the shows at a club called New Blue. I think you may have heard of it. There's mm-hmm. been a lot, it's a really hip kind of literally underground basement jazz club.
Right. And it's NU, right? NU.
NUBLU.
NUBLU, yes.
Yeah. So I'm calling the album Blue York because it's kind of an homage to New York and homage to all the artists of New York and around the world, definitely, that got affected by the pandemic. But having lived in New York for the last decade, it was just kind of like, it was tough. And it's an homage to live music. The material was recorded right before it shut down. Even one of the last gigs ended up had originally been booked like the week of shutdown. I think it was like March 20th. So obviously we had to cancel it. So
wow.
So all that to say, I was like, that's what I'm going to name it, Blue York, BLU York.
Mm-hmm.
So, and then we were in the midst of mixing everything, and then I already knew that this track with my dear friend Keon Harrell, trumpet player, was just like a barn burner. It was just so hot. I was like, oh, we got to release this first. So we released a quote unquote single. I don't know if they really do that in jazz, but a single, an advanced release, that has to be it. That'll make a big splash. And so we had already had that mixed, and we were in the midst of mixing all the other tracks. And then I got the call to do Seth Meyers. And so then we talked with the head of Rope-A-Dope and said, is there any way we could release this as a single? We'll get it mastered and ready to go. And can it be released right before Taku appears on Seth Meyers? And the label needed basically like a 9-day lead time to get all its ducks in a row, getting all the metadata and getting it all to every streaming platform, blah, blah, blah. Mm-hmm. It turned out it was like exactly 80 days before my appearance on Seth Meyers.
Oh, wow.
Or 90 days before. So they're like, yeah, let's do it. So we're like, okay, let's get it mastered and deliver just that track like next week. And so we did it, got it up and running. So we released the track July 16th on that Friday. And then that next Monday I was on Seth Meyers and he was already plugging it. So I was like, amazing.
That's so great. I absolutely love it. Yeah. And he plugged it.
Yeah.
Yeah. He plugged it every night. And he pointed out the fact that you were the first percussionist that they had.
Yeah.
Sitting in with the band. I love it. It's so great. I love what they do there. I mean, for just to focus on the drummers and have a new drummer sitting in every week. And, Eric Lederman does such a fantastic job of booking the drummers in for that spot. And I love that you were there. And when I heard you were going to be on, I was, hey, because it's so great.
I couldn't, he just reached out to me via Instagram. I just had a DM from him in my Instagram. He's like, I didn't know who he was. And he's saying, would you be interested in doing Seth Meyers? You'd be the first percussionist. Hit me back if you are, ASAP. I was like, oh yeah, sure. So it was fun. It was fun. It was a little bit of a challenge because at the same time, I kind of had to fill the role of the drummer, so it wasn't like I was able to float on top of a drummer laying the foundation. And I still, at that point, then I had a full rhythm section relying on me to really set the pace. So I did do a fusion kit, so if I'm playing at home, then I'm actually playing kick and snare with my feet on electronic pedals so that they still sonically feel that foundation, in a rock.
Yes, absolutely. So that it was filled out in that way. Yeah, that is definitely challenging. And hopefully when things get back live in the, everyone's able to get to the studio. It was fun. I actually saw the show years back and it was a lot of fun. Just the interaction. Zach Danziger was the guest on that day. So great. It was fantastic.
Yeah.
So you have the single out right now, and I will link to that in the YouTube description. And then the album drops October 1st. So we can all be looking forward to that. So it's going to be called, is it Taku Live from New York? Is that what you said?
The album name is Blue York.
Blue York. Yes.
Y-O-R-K. Blue York. But yeah, it'll be Taku Hirano live in New York.
Live in New York. Okay, perfect. So Blue York, and it's BLU York.
Yeah.
Perfect. Okay. I just want to make sure we get that right. But we'll put that information in the description as well. And I love everything you have going on. Every update from you, Taku, is always just fantastic. And you're, like I said earlier, you're always doing something new and exciting. So, keep doing what you're doing. It's fantastic.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
For sure. Really? Thank you so much for coming on today and spending some time with us. And I hope I get a chance to see you in person soon.
I hope so, Sarah. Definitely.
Absolutely. All right. Take care.
Okay. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you for tuning in today. Join us each Tuesday for new episodes of Sarah Hagan Backstage.